Okay, hello everyone. I got a very special guest today to discuss a book. We got Nick over at the Book Graveyard. And
Howdy.
I think Nick and I first started corresponding when we were both building very similar bookshelves. Isn't that right?
Yes, it is. As you can see, mine is stained. Ira's, years later, still not stained.
Bare wood. I'm afraid that the stain will leak into the books or something. So I'm just that's
You
my
gotta let it
excuse.
dry.
Oh, you don't put them on there wet?
No, it's hard not to though, because you're so excited after you build the shelves.
Mm-hmm.
You're
Want
like,
to
I
get
can't
all
wait to get these.
Yeah. So yeah, I didn't know much about a lot of the books you read. So when we started talking, I kind of got introduced to some men's adventure books and whatnot. I still haven't read one, but I'm kind of curious about this subgenre. I look at all my bookstores and I don't really see a lot of these books. I don't know if there's a secret section in the back where they keep them.
I don't. Yeah, they're not very popular. Oh, I've had a similar reaction when I first seen the description. Like I was when I lived in Arizona, I was in a Half Price Books, and they actually had it labeled men's adventure, and I just died laughing. I was like, what the hell is that? you know so i was
Uh-huh.
just like so I was like, oh, I gotta find out, and I bought them, and I was like, oh, they're just action books. They just called it men's adventure because that's what they called the magazines that came before them.
Gotcha.
There was the men's adventure magazines, and then they started doing them in paperback form.
And a lot of these, they were like marketed to men and truckers at truck stops. And stuff.
Yeah, it's very specific. Yeah, there's very specific subgenres in the genre.
Yeah,
I think it's funny that that's kind of what I'm known for, because I actually read more horror books throughout the year.
I
But I
think
think
that's what.
it's the impression of the term men's adventure that sticks out.
Yeah, definitely. And since I'm not wasn't aware of it, that's kind of what I associate you with. So I'm going to try to not associate you just with men's adventure anymore because, I mean, now you're reading hard science fiction, right?
Oh
So
my, yes.
the book we're going to talk about today is The Black Cloud by Fred Hoyle. And this book, I'll just do a brief little overview. This was written in 1957 by Fred Hoyle, and he was like an astronomer and cosmologist from England and wrote quite a bit of science fiction. I think he even wrote some with his son. And he definitely writes a little bit more in the hard science fiction. But from 1957, I think some people would be on the verge of calling this like true hard science fiction, but it gets pretty mathy at times. um, so yeah, did you do any more research on the man himself, or?
I no, I mean, as I was reading it, I was like, who is writing this thing? And then it looks like we have the same copy. So it
Yeah,
has this little blurb here on the back where it's like he was an astronomer, and he
mhm.
wrote two nonfiction books. And I'm assuming this is his first fiction book. But
Yeah, I didn't look at that. I know he wrote a few others, but this definitely could have been his first one. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and
So
that's all I knew about him. I mean, I figured that he was the main character once I got further into the book.
yeah, yeah. I think he definitely wrote himself as the main character. Pretty obvious. So this book, I didn't really know much going into it. I didn't even really read the back. So there's some kind of like twist that happens in it that took me off guard, but apparently everyone talks about this part of the novel. So I don't think it's spoilerish. We'll probably just start off spoiler free. If we want to get into spoilers, I'll just like timestamp the video so that people can avoid that if they want to.
Yeah, actually, when we were first mentioned it, and I was like, oh, I have that Black Cloud book. It looks like a post-apocalypse book. And in the comment section, I forget who said it, but they said what it was. So it was like I already knew because it was spoiled in your comments.
Yeah, and Yeah,
But
it
it says
kind
it
of
on the. It's not a spoiler because it says it on the back of the book.
yeah, yeah. Yep, exactly. And when I was first started reading this, I was like, did we pick the right book? Is there enough to talk about with this one? It was a little dry, but it did keep surprising me. My overall impression was I really did like this in the end. I thought there was some enough interesting things going on. I don't know what your kind of quick overall impression was.
Well, first off, let's point out how hilarious it is that of all the guests that you had to come do this series that you're doing, all the science fiction channels, that you got me to do this one with a quote on the front that says, "Without a question, the most intelligently written science fiction story I've ever read." You got the wrong guy here.
Hey, you're the one that picked it out.
I thought it was going to be a post-apocalypse book,
Yeah,
survival, like.
yeah. Yeah, that was the impression. I knew this book a long time ago was kind of like on the list, and I'd seen one video from another booktuber, and they were really pitching this as a post-apocalyptic, is dark, but it's like just talked about. You don't really. It's not like reading a post-apocalyptic book.
Yeah.
It's definitely a bunch of astronomers standing around talking and hating on politicians.
That's I'm glad you brought that up because that's my favorite part about this book.
Same here, and we'll talk about some quotes I saved later. A lot of them
Yeah.
had to do with that.
Yeah.
But I guess before we get ahead of ourselves, I'll kind of give like a brief synopsis. So there were some astronomers that started noticing this kind of, shaded area of space. It was kind of obscuring some stars, and some British astronomers came over to California in the beginning, and they were using some of these grand telescopes to try to kind of figure out what was going on. I think it was originally discovered by an amateur too. So I think it was his way of kind of giving a nod to the amateur astronomer, which, the sky is so large, a lot of stuff does get discovered by random people sometimes. Um, but they discover this thing, and it looks like it's moving towards Earth, and they start analyzing it to see what it's going to do. And in the beginning, they're just kind of trying to figure out how long it's going to take, and they kind of come up with about like 16 months. I should also note this was written in 57, but kind of takes place in the early 60s, so just like a few years after it was written. So it feels like a book of its time. And so this cloud's heading towards Earth. They don't know how close it's going to get. They're kind of like theorizing what it's going to do, but they realize that it's going to be bad, and so they have to warn some of the politicians and the world at some point, and they kind of have to decide when to do that. And then ultimately this thing does come by and doesn't act exactly like they expected, but it still throws the world into chaos. And then the one part that I didn't even realize, but it is written on the back of the book. This is also like a first contact book. So this cloud has a little bit more. It's not just a astronomical event or phenomenon. There's something else going on with this thing, which I thought was really cool, not knowing that ahead of time. You want to add to that at all? You want to talk about the
Um,
math?
talk about the what?
The math.
The math. Yeah. I know. It has diagrams.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's yeah, this book is definitely written for other scientists, I would say. Uh maybe not the general public, you know. It's intelligently written. It's the most intelligently written book ever.
Well, there was like Hugo Gernsback, he really wanted science fiction to introduce the public to some of these concepts. And I feel like, this was many years after Hugo was really pushing this, but this is definitely along those veins. There's enough entertainment and story to keep you going, but he really was kind of trying to educate the layman a bit. Some of it would probably go over a lot of people's head. I kind of like this stuff and find most of it fascinating, but
Yeah, I was a lot of it is just them discussing theories, physics theories
Mhm.
of what's going on. A lot of this book. I think I wrote down that it feels like I'm reading a textbook that's like sprinkled with fiction.
Yep.
Yeah, I was curious when I was reading this, like what your background is. Like, how much of this did you understand? Do you have like a science background?
Engineering, I
Yeah.
kind of enjoy, like, YouTube channels like Star Talk with Neil deGrasse Tyson. And I've been, whenever we travel, we try to go to observatories. One of my favorite places in the world is the Griffith Observatory outside of LA on the edges of town. And, you know, seeing like Saturn's rings for the first time and Jupiter's moons have always kind of been just really important moments almost in my life. Like, kind of like, whoa, this stuff is really out there. So I know a little bit about it. You know, afterwards, Fred Hoyle was, like you said, he kind of wrote himself into this main character, and the main character was this brass, outspoken guy coming up with theories that turned out to be wrong. Which from what I can tell, Hoyle kind of got caught into a little bit of that too. I think he did come up with some theories that still hold true, but some of the stuff he was coming up with was, speculation that never really turned out to be true. But yeah, there was the beginning of the book, especially not knowing what I was getting into, it felt a little dry, a little academic.
The beginning? The beginning is what was the only thing where stuff was actually I felt like it was happening. It kind of reminded me of Independence Day, that movie. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Where
Yeah.
it's like, and I really liked it because it had the astronomers in the United States and then the ones in the UK simultaneously realizing that there's this thing up in the sky. And at that point, I really enjoyed all of the science jargon. I didn't understand it, but it had like it created the atmosphere that you want. This is what you want, in a science fiction book,
Yeah.
right?
Some
And
impending
it
doom.
actually had stuff like what was that?
Some impending doom too, kind of.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. And I'm like, this is going to be great because I'm imagining it like the Independence Day, where it's like it's going to build up and be really smart, and then it's going to be action packed later on.
Mm-hmm.
So I was into the science stuff at the beginning, but it did feel like it was moving pretty fast. Like they were going here, going there. Like, oh no, what are we going to do? They're like you said, discussing it with the politicians, and yeah, I was into it like at the beginning. I don't know if I ever would have quit if I was just reading it on my own. There was a
Mhm.
part in the middle where I was just like, oh man, come on.
Yeah, I did expect a little bit more of this like post-apocalyptic thing, but like at one point this cloud does come by and wreak havoc on the planet, and it's just like stated, like 25% of the population didn't make it, like there's no description of the chaos that's ensuing and people desperate for their lives. It's just
Oh, I
stated,
know.
really, right?
And it wasn't even like I was waiting for like this big like this the beginning of a chapter, like and then the tidal waves came
Yeah.
and I was just reading along and then it got to where it started talking about the how nature had changed kind of. And I was like, "Is this it? This is a catastrophe." I didn't even realize it was happening. And
Yeah.
it's like, and it's all from the perspective of them hauled down in their little fortress,
Yeah.
and you're like, "Where's the action?"
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So th- I guess for me, the beginning was interesting, but felt a little slow, and then I was wanting a little bit more of that. But I really like the part where this cloud ended up being a little bit more than they thought, and they had to kind of go through some effort. And this is where I don't know if we're even getting into spoiler territory. I think everybody knows, and right on the back it says, uh, at the last line of this, man had one small chance to survive. They had to appeal to an alien intelligence that might exist and that might or not care even enough to help. So like something's going on. And that was pretty cool. I thought like that kind of hooked me, and I was like, wow, where is he going with this? And they had to figure out like how to communicate with this thing and what it wanted, and that part was pretty cool. It kind of got a little weird at the end, almost like he was, I don't know if he's just trying to wrap up the book or what, but you know,
I think he was
he was,
he was making himself a martyr. That's what he was
yeah,
doing.
yeah, yeah,
He,
definitely.
he's dying for the rest of us.
Yep. Yeah. And yeah, there's even the quote at the end. I wrote that down. It says, "Do we want to remain big people in a tiny world or little people in a vast world?" So yeah, I think he had a lot to say in this, and he definitely said some things about politicians and life in general, and what our place maybe is in the universe. It was pretty interesting. I could see like reading this in 1957 was probably pretty mind blowing, some of the ideas and concepts and stuff, but
Mm.
probably dated a little bit.
It's insulting to gardeners.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why? Why? Why does he hate on that guy?
Yeah.
He's
At
just
one point,
he's just a gardener. Why you got to make him so stupid?
yeah, he's like, if you can explain this to the gardener, then anyone can figure this out. Yeah. And
And when they introduced the gardener, I was like, oh, he's going to play a part later on. Maybe he's going to point out something that's obvious that a scientist wouldn't notice because they're thinking up here.
Mhm.
No, he's just there to be like, we're not dumb gardeners.
Yep. Yeah. There's also a female character that was,
The musician.
yeah, she did show him up like once, I think. But she was mostly just making him coffee and there to kind of.
I wrote that down. She said, "Oh, it's getting too scientific in here. I'm gonna go make some coffee." And I was just like, "Take me with you, Anne. Take me with you."
I like coffee.
Like this. It was during the ionization centimeter chapter
Oh
where
yeah.
I was just like, I can't take much more of this. Okay, now move it 10 more centimeters. What's the ionization level? This is brutal.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say this is this probably the hardest science fiction thing you've read or that got into
Yeah,
any math?
yeah. And I do like science fiction. I have a big old box right there, but I
Yeah.
usually lean more towards the post-apocalyptic or the kind of horror borderline sci-fi.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was way out of my league, dude.
Yeah, I would say if this was like borderline, I don't know if you'd like Hal Clement or even more so this guy named Robert L. Forward. He was an actual like I think it was some sort of theoretical physicist or something, and yeah, he gets real deep into the maths.
Man, yeah, this wasn't a writer writing science fiction. This was a scientist trying to write fiction.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
that, the science part was definitely first, and the writing was second.
yeah. I don't know. For me, I kind of want your opinion. I didn't feel like he was showing off to be smart. Is more of like trying to educate or something. But that was my opinion. And reading this in 2025, I don't know what people's reaction would have been back then, but
Yeah, I don't know if he wasn't so insulting to everyone else. I might think that, but like you said, I mean, or like we said, it was the gardener was stupid. The musician woman was simple. The politicians were stupid. I mean, who in this book besides the scientists were worth anything?
yeah. Yeah, he even talked about how the hierarchy of civilization was upside down, where you had the politicians at the top, like the people that do the work or whatever it was in the middle, and then the brains basically at the bottom.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk any more about the plot or about this alien intelligence? Do we
Let's
do
see.
spoilers?
Let's see if I missed anything. Oh, I guess that you were an engineer in my notes. I forgot to tell you. I was like, I get the impression you're an engineer, and look at that, you were.
Yeah, I'm
Uh,
not technically an engineer, but I'm a designer, so I work in an engineering company.
well, you count. I'll
Yeah,
count it on you. I'll count it,
that's what
Ira.
everyone else says too. So yeah, when like books like this where it's people talking about how the workings of engineering or science works, that I can relate to it at a point. Even like going back, I don't know if you've read anything from Jules Verne,
No.
but he definitely had an understanding about how like science and engineering worked. And he was writing, the I forget, Around the Moon or From the Earth to the Moon, one of his more popular books. He didn't have the idea of rockets down yet, so they made a big slingshot or a catapult to launch people up to the moon.
Yeah, yeah.
but but like he talked about the science and the engineering and how the process would work, and it's, I feel like, pretty accurate. And like even Isaac Asimov kind of gets into that, and so I'm definitely a lot more tolerant to that kind of stuff than a lot of readers.
Yeah, I mean, when I read other genres, it's in there too, like there's certain, like if you read a Western, there's certain Westerns that are more about the action or the mystery. There's, sometimes there's mysteries in it, but there will be some that I read where it's very in depth about that time period, lots of accurate descriptions of
Mhm.
how the guns work, or I don't know anything about the West. So to me, those I get the
Railroad
same reaction in
technology.
those books as it grinds it to a halt to me
Yeah.
because that's not what I'm into. If you read a crime book, and they focus too much on the law part, I think it would be the same,
Mhm.
instead of just shootouts and stuff. So it's not, I guess, I'm not so much criticizing this book for that, even though it sounds like I am. It's just that it's something that I have an issue with in all types of genres when it gets too specific. But that's okay because I think that they're shooting for that audience. They're not
Yeah.
shooting for someone who reads a bunch of stuff. He wanted to directly, like, when I was reading this, I was like, I imagine he's writing for those characters from that Big Bang show, like people like that are like, oh yes, this is quite possible.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I this is definitely not like, hard science fiction is not my favorite subgenre. I had to take it now and then. But I do see the appeal to it. I do enjoy most of it that I read. It still has to be well written. You need a story. You just don't want to feel like you're at a college lecture.
Yeah.
So to me, like some of the crazy characters, there's even the Russian character in this one who's kind of a source of some comedy. There was enough that kept me going, and I like this one overall.
I think I would have enjoyed it more if I didn't know that it was going to be about aliens.
Hmm.
If I just thought it was a disaster and then it was told that it was, a spaceship, but they say it right on the back cover. I don't know. Why did they do that? Why do books do that?
I know, because I didn't read the back cover, and when they started communicating with this black cloud, it kind of blew my mind. I had no idea he was going to go that way. I thought it was going to be, strictly some phenomenon that happened to be cruising by. But then all of a sudden you got this intelligence, and you got these scientists trying to tap this thing for information, and this thing is doing its own thing and ends up having to leave for purposes. I don't want to spoil too much because I don't know. This is considered a classic. I think a lot of people that watch my channel would definitely be into reading this. I know Richard Rempel over at Vintage SF read this one quite a while ago, and I think he liked this one. A couple other YouTubers I know have read this one. Kind of considered a classic, but definitely on the harder side. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I was out of my league, Ira, that's for sure.
Well, maybe you like hit your first level, your ceiling, and then you read some more, and then you say, maybe that wasn't so bad. I want to try it again. And I
Yeah.
would recommend maybe something from Hal Clement if you wanted to try again. I know Jake from Pulp Mortem read a Hal Clement, and I haven't read the one he read, and he said it got real academic and it lost him. But I've read Mission of Gravity and a bunch of his short stories. That a lot of his short stories are like puzzles, and you almost have to know about physics and this kind of stuff to figure out the ending. Like you're left like, well, wait, how did? And he doesn't explain it to you. And
Oh, it sounds awesome.
yeah, it's awesome. It's a puzzle, but some of them
I'm kidding, Ira. It sounds
awesome for me.
like a nightmare. It's really hard, and then he doesn't explain it at the end. You should check it
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, even Isaac Asimov, when he creates some sort of puzzle and you can't figure out, he always has the smartest person in the room explain it to like the janitor or to the dumb scientist. So the reader's
The
like, oh,
gardener.
that's what happened, you know. But Hal Clement doesn't explain it to you. It's up to you to figure it out. It's like a a mind puzzle or something.
Mm.
Not for everyone, maybe.
No, yeah, I don't know about that one.
So there was a lot of hating on politicians. I wrote down a couple quotes. One was, I find the more I tell politicians, they're talking about this event, and the astronomers like, I find the more that I tell politicians about this, the more they get depressed. So my policy is to tell them everything.
Yeah.
And then the other one is, some men would go off their heads, others take to drink. My form of escapism is to roar at politicians. There's a lot of hating on politicians. And then the other throwaway line that I'm going to try to remember is, like when you wake up and you don't feel so fresh and maybe you need to go brush your teeth, he says, I've got a mouth like the bottom of a parrot cage. So
Yeah, get some quips, get some
yeah,
one-liners.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, the politician hatred was so awesome. I love how when they first discover it, and it's like the politicians are like, oh, like what is this? Oh, we need to. Here's what we'll take care of this, and they're all on board with the scientists. And then the moment it becomes inconvenient for like society, so like, okay, well, now we're gonna have to shut down. They're like, no, 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 no. I don't think you're right. They start doubting when it becomes inconvenient. I was like, that's two
Yeah,
thumbs up. I was like, that
yeah,
was spot on.
yeah, yeah. Some of that political commentary was really good. I think that's a lot of that's probably timeless.
Yeah, when this one was the most brutal one where they think that the guy, who is it? There's someone from the government, right? And they're with them at the Fortress of
Mhm.
Solitude, and he's they're getting almost, is this spoiler alert? Is this spoiler territory? When the government's kind of like threatening him, and
I
he's
think,
like,
yeah, I doubt it. People could skip, but this is probably a good part.
and the guy from the government is like, they think that you're going to be a fascist. They think that when someone has the ability, they have all this possible power, that they're obviously going to take it because they don't know any different. Because that's why people get into politics,
Hmm.
was to have complete control. And I was like, wow,
Yeah.
wow. He basically just called them all fascists, all
Oh
of them.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and like they in their little base that they set up, they were basically kind of the gatekeepers of all this information being beamed around the planet from one country to the next. And
Hmm.
he definitely put them in a noble place. They never abused that power, these scientists.
Hmm.
But that was part of the reason, I think, right? They didn't want the government to take that role and use it to their advantage. So
Yeah,
yeah.
and what does the government do?
Yeah, it could have been bad.
Mhm. I enjoyed that part. I don't know.
Yeah. But so I guess so overall, what would you, if you had to give this a 1 to 5 rating? You don't have to either, but
Are we talking like
it's not going to hurt my
en
feelings.
enjoyment level?
Yeah. Overall,
Overall, probably a 2.
a 2. Okay.
Yeah. It
Yeah.
was it was just too much science. I definitely started skimming at a certain point where I was just like, "I can't take any more of it." Like, I need something to happen. There's
Yeah.
just so much discussion. It's just
Yeah.
scientists sitting around discussing things for probably 70% of this book.
Yep. Yeah, and like you said, the you look at the cover and what you know about this thing and what this black cloud's going to do to the world, and it's covered in a sentence, couple sentences basically. So yeah, I was hoping there would be more of that. Some of my favorite science fiction are dystopian or post-apocalyptic, and seeing how humanity reacts at their worst, and
Mhm.
this is these scientists who were rising to the challenge. So there wasn't a lot of darkness to this one really. But yeah, I would have to give this one probably a 3.5, somewhere in there. I thought like, for especially when I put it into the context of its time, and the kind of twist of this cloud having some intelligence, and it was a lot of just discussing how to communicate with this thing when we get later in the book. But I've read quite a few science fiction. It's almost like a little subgenre where they have to try to figure out how to communicate with another alien race or entity or something. And I always find that kind of interesting. So that's coming from my background.
Yeah, well, like I said, man, if it was like Independence Day, that's what they did in Independence Day. It would have
Yeah.
been awesome. I would have totally enjoyed it, even if you don't understand what they're talking about. There,
Hmm.
it has a certain feel to it. You feel like it's real. It's exciting.
Hmm. Yeah. Plausible. It could happen. And then this one didn't do that. Well, this is good. Took you out of your comfort zone. Maybe you can return the favor, and we could do something that takes me out of my comfort zone. Doesn't have to be men's adventure. Maybe some old horror, because most of my horror experience is Stephen King or Robert McCammon or Dan Simmons. The big names. So
Yeah, yeah, that'd be cool. Yeah. There's so many offshoots of that, especially Stephen King like blew it up, and then everyone was like, "Oh." So it is kind of sort of in that style, but it's just cool to see what other people kind of come up with. It
yeah,
can
for
still be wordy though. That's the thing. I've been really loving these little books. These like short. It's so much fun to just kill 180 pages in 2 days. And then the next story and the next story. So it's kind of getting hard to grab those 300-page books now.
Yeah, that's how I am. I went through a phase where I was like trying to read big books and really getting into them and enjoying that aspect. But since I started this channel and have kind of gone back to the older stuff, which is usually around 200 pages, I see these big books on my shelf that I want to read, and I end up just kind of pushing it off. So
Because all I can think of is if I read that one, then I can't read three of these. You know,
Mhm. Yeah.
because you only have that so much time.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, I was at a thrift store yesterday and I got this book. It looked like a paperback from hell. It was written in 1975, called Feral, and it's like got a cat on the cover.
Yeah,
I for
I got 2 copies of it.
Have you read that one yet?
No, no.
Maybe that's one we could do. It's super short.
Yeah.
I don't know. I picked it up for like 10 cents, and turns out it was kind of like a paperback from hell, or that. When I see like an animal on the cover now and it's like written in the 70s, and
Hmm.
it's not like a photograph, it's like actually some artwork. It's like, I know those are probably, worth some money or probably worth reading because they're just absurd horror stories a lot of times.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of them that are boring too. And a lot of them, it's just like any other genre. They're where the genre is popular at the time, so they market it to make it look like it. So I read many that I thought were going to be horror books, and they weren't horror like at all. I read one that was about, it was kind of like a Jurassic Park, but the humans, there was like humans going back to Neanderthals,
Hmm.
and it was like not horror at all, but it has this giant crocodile on the cover. And it's called Carnivores. And it's like they just marketed it for that Stephen King,
Yeah.
you know.
Get someone to buy it for the cover. Any last closing comments or any grand things to impart on my community or
Well, I mean, I wanted to talk about a video that I'm recording after this.
okay.
And it is, I'm speaking of Men's Adventure. I'm doing a flip through of the recent Men's Adventure Quarterly, which is also the UFO episode issue.
Is
So I
this
thought it might have crossover appeal. Yeah, so it's reprint stuff from the Men's Adventure magazines that I was talking at the beginning. So they go back and they pick stuff and they put it into a specific theme. Like the one before this was all Vietnam stories, but this one is the UFO episode issue.
oh cool.
Why am I saying episode?
Because you're gonna do an episode on it.
Exactly.
Well, thanks for coming on the channel and reading this book. Hope you would have liked it a little more, but you know, I respect everyone's opinion and glad it took you out of your comfort zone. And so, like I said, maybe you'll repay the favor. So,
Yeah, totally. Well,
all right. Well, thanks, and we'll see you in the next video, everyone.